What do you imagine from a war? Death, destruction, hunger, or the loss of freedom? What if war is no longer a matter of death, no longer a matter of hunger, and no longer a matter of right and wrong? But the war that we are going to face is the total destruction of civilization. All the internet will die. Money is no longer a means of buying and selling. Millions of people are stranded on the ground and no one dares to bury them. Billions of people are hungry. Animals are extinct. Fruits and all plants can no longer be eaten. Poison and oxygen clash in the air. Forest fires and tsunamis break out in every ocean in the world. Earthquakes occur every hour and the sky is completely dark. We can no longer see the sun for years. The image of the apocalypse is also depicted in reality, and we can only desperately wait for death inside the bunker by eating and drinking as much as possible. All the experiences and horrors that I mentioned earlier are the results of Albert Einstein's prediction 2 years after the Second World War. In his prediction, Einstein stated that the Third World War was likely to bring humans back to the Stone Age. And now, maybe we are halfway to what Einstein predicted. Before we reveal what Einstein meant, we should first look at the context when Einstein said his prediction. Because what was predicted by Einstein in 1947 could not be removed from the Second World War. Because nuclear weapons, which became the most deadly weapon for the survival of mankind, were indirectly the result of Einstein's thinking. This all started from the theory of relativity that Einstein invented. Because from the theory of relativity, it became the principle of the atom bomb. In addition, the Manhattan Project was the result of the inspiration of former US President Roosevelt on a letter sent by Einstein. After reading the letter from Einstein, Roosevelt immediately formed the Uranium Advisory Committee to create the Manhattan Project, which contained the science knowledge that was headed by Oppenheimer. And from this Manhattan Project, a deadly work was created, the atom bomb that destroyed the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Although Einstein was never directly involved in the Manhattan Project that created the atom bomb or the creation of nuclear weapons, but his theory of relativity, which theoretically made it possible for nuclear weapons to be created. For that, Einstein was haunted by regret in his life, if he remembered that the mass destruction weapon that really scared him was based on his scientific theory. Realizing this fact, Einstein was really sorry. In an interview with Newsweek in 1947, Einstein said, "If I knew Germany would fail to develop the atom bomb, I wouldn't do anything." Einstein became more and more regretful and angry when Time magazine in July 1946, in the cover of the magazine, showed a picture of himself with the formula E=mc2 with the explosion of the atom bomb. In other words, Einstein was very aware of the impact of nuclear weapons on the continuation of human civilization. Then 2 years after World War II was over, precisely in March 1947, a report from liberal Judaism about Einstein's conversation with his fellow scientist at a dinner party. At the party, Einstein was asked by Alfred Werner about what new weapon that could be used in World War III. Surprised by the question and remembering his regret, Einstein turned his head. But after a few minutes, Einstein answered and said that he didn't know what weapon would be used in World War III. But there was no doubt about what weapon would be used in World War IV. His fellow scientists continued to ask, "What is it?" Then Einstein answered, "Sticks and stones." Einstein said so because he was sure that if World War III really happened, countries would definitely use nuclear weapons. And when the war was over, the world would experience total destruction and destruction, where the remaining weapons for humans were only sticks and stones. For us who were born and grew up in a peaceful time, perhaps we have no idea about the darkness and misery of war. But Einstein, he became a living witness in 2 world wars. Even in World War II, Einstein was in the circle of war decision makers. No wonder Einstein realized how damaging the technological advancements that endorsed war. So his prophecy about World War III would force human civilization back to the Stone Age. And from this prophecy, Einstein indirectly assured that World War III would be very scary and destroy or perhaps could be the end of human civilization's existence. Why not? Because of two wars that have been recorded in history. War is always about death and destruction. Now, if World War III really happened, what guarantees that large countries would not destroy each other with nuclear weapons, which has the potential for total destruction? Because after the Cold War was over, large countries like America and Russia threatened each other with their nuclear weapons. And after World War II was over, there were several events in every corner of the world that almost made human history go into World War. And what were those events? The first one is the breakup of the war in Korea in 1950-1953. The war between South Korea and North Korea was previously predicted could open World War III, because whether or not the Cold War between the two powers, between the Soviets and America, had just begun. And the outcome of this Korean War, the Soviets and America had a vital contribution. Because North Korea was fully supported by the Soviets with its communist ideology umbrella, and South Korea was endorsed by America with its capitalist power, the Korean War almost made these two powers really face each other. But fortunately, these two countries finished their roles only with weapons and decided to make a zone agreement demilitarization between South Korea and North Korea. The second is the missile crisis in Cuba. This crisis occurred for 13 days, starting on the 16th and ending on October 28, 1962. In the midst of the heat of the mutual threat situation, nuclear missiles in the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Soviets sent the B-59 submarine, which was equipped with a torpedo with a nuclear explosion, to the Mary to build a maritime base. However, on October 27, 1962, the Soviet submarine was intercepted by a U.S. Navy fleet in the Caribbean Sea, which is an international watershed. The U.S. Navy fleet consisted of one USS Randolph as well as 11 destroyers. These U.S. Navy fleets deployed depth charges or depth bombs, forcing the B-59 Soviet submarine to rise to the surface. Captain B-59 Valentin Savitsky, who felt provoked, requested permission to release their nuclear torpedoes. Fortunately, especially for the B-59 submarine, which carried nuclear torpedoes, the Soviet Navy policy stipulates that permission to launch new torpedoes will only be given a green light after 3 commanders in the ship agreed. Because in addition to Savitsky, the commander on the B-59 submarine was Ivan Maslenikov, who was a senior political officer, and Commodore Vasily Arkhipov, who was a senior Army liaison officer. And Arkhipov was the only person who opposed the launch of the nuclear, and Arkhipov was also the one who eventually won the discussion of the 3 B-59 submarine commanders of the Soviets. In addition to not starting World War III, Arkhipov also argued that the condition of the B-59 submarine battery began to deteriorate, and the air cooling engine was damaged due to the explosion of the Dave charge carried out by the U.S. Navy. From the decisions made by Arkhipov, he saved America and the Soviets from a terrible war after Savitsky and Maslenikov agreed to the B-59 decision to go to the surface. If Arkhipov lost in making the decision at all, the World War broke out that day because Arthur M. Schlesinger Jr., who served as President Kennedy's advisor at the time, stated that the incident was not only the most dangerous moment in the Cold War, but also the most dangerous moment in the human race. In addition, Thomas Blanton, director of the National Security Archive of America, when interviewed by Marion Lyotte from the Boston Globe on October 13, 2002, once recalled this incident by stating that a soldier, Vasily Arkhipov, had saved the world. Because during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, the Soviet Union and the United States were at the brink of a nuclear conflict. After American intelligence found Soviet missiles in the Cuban region, after learning about it for 13 days, tensions rose to a dangerous level, until the threat of collusion made both sides agree to no longer be involved in the nuclear effort. The third was when the Indian-Pakistan War broke out. At that time, December had just entered its third day in 1971, when 11 air bases of the Indian Air Force were attacked by Pakistan. An attack that started the Indian-Pakistan War continued until 13 days later. This war was the impact of the Eastern Pakistan Independence War, which is now the Bangladesh region. For 13 days, from day to day, the confrontation grew. The Indian front received support from the Soviets, which is tied to the friendship and cooperation of the Soviet India in August 1971. And the same thing with Pakistan, which also received support from the United States, which were both included in the Central Treaty Organization, or CENTO. Although at first the Soviets and the United States only provided support for morale and weapons, the escalation of their involvement increased as Pakistan's position in eastern Pakistan began to weaken, and Pakistan in the west began to be threatened with a major invasion by India. Realizing the potential that would be more dangerous, U.S. President at the time, Richard Nixon, sent a task force of 74 from the 7th Fleet of the U.S. Navy to the Bay of Bengal. At the beginning of December 1971, with the help of his loyal ally Britain, who also sent the HMS Eagle Indian ship, the Soviets responded by sending 2 destroyer groups and 2 exploration ships to the Indian Ocean. The situation made the United States and the Soviets truly involved in direct combat and had the potential to start World War III. Because each of the troops of the 2 blocks only had to wait for orders from their highest leader. Fortunately, finally on December 10, 1971, Nixon took the initiative to contact the highest Soviet leader at the time, namely Leonid Brezhnev, through the hotline, a special communication system that was built since the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. The message sent by Nixon said that the Soviets had to contain India's aggression as much as possible, where Leonid Brezhnev had a great influence, because if not, the next actions must also be endured by the Soviets. 3 days later, the Kremlin just responded to the request of the White House. The Kremlin will await confirmation of the latest situation in East Pakistan. The Kremlin also insisted that it did not fully support if India intends to invade Pakistan in the West. As a result, tensions between the United States and the Soviets diminished. Apart from India's victory at Dhaka through the surrender without condition of the East Pakistan Military Commando to India on December 16, 1971, which ended the establishment of Bangladesh. However, that moment was very exciting and had a high potential to start World War III. Next, there was the Yom Kippur War, when Israel was torn apart by the Arab countries in the Yom Kippur War, which began on October 6th and ended on October 25, 1973. It turned out that in that war, the United States and the Soviets were once again involved. The 6th Army of the United States, led by Admiral Daniel Murphy, who defended Israel and the Mediterranean Soviet Squadron, led by Admiral Yevgeny Volhubuyev, who supported the Arab countries almost stranded at sea. On October 24, 1973, the 2 armies were faced with a distance of only a few hundred miles. Even the United States increased the DEFCON status, or the defense condition, from Siaga 4 to Siaga 3. According to Larry Godston and Yuri Zhukov in the journal U.S. Naval War College Review, written in 2004, the 2 leaders of the Army, both the United States and the Soviets, even prepared their own strategies if they had to fight a war that could trigger World War III. Based on personal records of the Skadron combination, Captain Yevgeny Semenov said that Volhubayev's strategy had a scenario considering at that time the Soviet army lacked air power. So Volhubayev had planned to destroy all his weapons, the 2 Indian ships, before they could launch their planes. All missiles, torpedoes, and rockets would be launched in total, considering none of them would survive if there was an air attack. Meanwhile, Admiral Murphy was ordered by the U.S. Joint Staff Headquarters to continue to avoid any maneuvers that could be interpreted by the Soviets or Arab countries as a direct intervention in the conflict. The reverse happened when Egypt was ready to accept the U.S. proposal to ask for personnel assistance. That made the Soviets also immediately involved. The U.S. again lowered its DEFCON status back to Siaga 4. The potential of the conflict finally cooled after there was a clash of weapons, followed by the issuance of Resolution DK-PBB 339, which ended the Yom Kippur War. The 5th is the Pristina Airport incident, and this incident took place a day after the Kosovo War. ended through the Kumo-Novo Agreement on June 11th in 1999, an incident at Pristina International Airport, Kosovo, even triggered the Third World War. Because of it, Russia sent 30 armored combat vehicles and 250 soldiers led by Major Viktor Zaferzin to occupy the airport before the arrival of NATO peacekeeping troops. Getting news of the airport occupied by Russia, the highest rank of the U.S. NATO troops is General Wesley Clark, sending a joint intelligence force from the Air Service 22 Special Unit, which is based on the 5th Linut Brigade, the 4th Cavalry Brigade, and the Norwegian Special Command Force Elite Force. The troops are led by the British general named Mike Jackson. Clark, who saw that the number of Russian troops was less and did not have air support, ordered a blockade so that Russian troops could not leave, and then destroyed. Jackson also insisted that it was the same as provoking gunfire. The result could start a new war on a more terrible scale. But fortunately, there was a new agreement between Russia and NATO that took place in early July 1999. In that new agreement, the agreement stated that Russian troops could still operate as peacekeeping troops in Kosovo with NATO, but not under NATO command. The sixth is the U.S. drone attack incident that killed the most respected General Qasem Soleimani in Baghdad on January 3, 2020. Because one day, Iran flung a red flag as a symbol of reckoning. Both the leader of the border, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and the president of Iran, Hassan Rouhani, both promised military retaliation, not a diplomatic solution. The U.S. President Donald Trump responded to the threat by saying that if Iran makes military calculations, America will retaliate by attacking 52 important locations in Iran. This incident also made the whole world aware. World War III immediately became the talk of all social media, followed by several memes themed World War III. And perhaps the most sensational is the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which began on February 24, 2022. In the Limited Wars War, or a war that only uses some of the Russian military forces to Ukraine, this is part of the country's alliance that owns nuclear. Because in Russian invasion of Ukraine, Putin, the Russian ruler, relied on his nuclear rhetoric and authorized the country's invasion with the interests of the Russian nation. Therefore, with that rhetoric, Putin threatened to direct intercontinental ballistic missiles with the ICBM RS-28 type, the Sarmat to the west, which hindered the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The Sarmat missiles that Russia owns are known to be able to bring nuclear bombs and destroy targets as far as 18,000 kilometers. And it's not a common secret, if Russia has the deadliest nuclear weapon in the world, which is called the Tsar Bomba, which has a power of 100 megatons, which is claimed to have 3,800 times the power of the Little Boy bomb, which penetrated the city of Hiroshima. Even the Haryandaisans said the Tsar Bomba could destroy London and kill almost 6 million people in just a moment. In addition to Putin, members of the Russian Parliamentary Defense Committee, namely General Andrei Gurylyov, affirmed that with his nuclear weapon, Russia would not hesitate to destroy US and British satellites, which is considered the strongest NATO country to help Ukraine. Even Gurylyov ensured that Russia would make London their first nuclear target. The threat from Russia was directly responded by the United States, Britain, and NATO member states, or the North Atlantic Defense Pact. The most worrying consequence of the Russian-Ukrainian crisis that is on the rise is the return of a polarized geopolitical alliance with loyalty to the Western Bloc, namely the United States and European countries, or the Eastern Bloc between Russia and China, which marks the return of the geopolitical model of the Cold War, and this is worried could push both camps to use nuclear weapons if diplomatic approaches find a way out. Because if that threat is made, this could trigger the outbreak of World War III. Especially the Russian invasion of Ukraine has not yet found a clear point. Although in 1986 there were about 70,300 nuclear explosions around the world, however in early 2023 the number dropped to an estimated 12,500 owned by 11 countries. From the Federation of American Scientists record, the 11 countries are Russia, America, France, China, Britain, Israel, Pakistan, India, Iran, and the last is North Korea. Russia can be confirmed to be a country that has the most nuclear explosions in the world, with a total of 5,889. This figure is followed by the United States, which has about 5,224 nuclear explosions. The number of nuclear weapons owned by these two countries can reach 89% of all nuclear weapons in the world. Quoted from the article, owned by the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, a number of nuclear weapons owned by the United States are in other countries such as Turkey, Germany, Netherlands, Italy, and Belgium. Therefore, the absolute number of nuclear weapons owned by each country is a national secret. This makes the calculation of nuclear weapons reported never have significant certainty. Now our awareness has increased because the escalation of global conflict is increasing and real. Starting from the genocide carried out by Israel on Palestine, China is getting hotter with Taiwan, and lately it's back to North Korea with South Korea. For that reason, the Third World War is no longer an impossible thing, either in the Middle East, Korea, or it can be in the Tuna Sea. Now the question we have to ask is what will happen if the Third World War breaks up? And is the rumor about the Third World War that can bring human civilization back to the Stone Age can be justified? According to a report by the American Finding Dulcinea, one of the most significant impacts of the Third World War is the lost trust between powerful countries. The trust that is fading in the decision of diplomatic relations and tension is increasing because it is difficult to settle peacefully. The economy will also be affected if the Third World War explodes. The financial market will be disrupted, international trade will be disrupted. Even the country with the most stable economy will also collapse. As many countries focus on war and geopolitical competition, trade agreements will collapse overnight, and comprehensive sanctions can be imposed. In addition, the global army chain will face heavy challenges because many countries are taking steep steps. Important aspects such as communication networks and important infrastructures can be the main target of the Third World War. The war will also cause millions of people in the conflict zone to leave their homes to find a safer place. These refugees are likely to look for shelter in neighboring countries, and domestic countries will be overwhelmed by refugees. And when the battlefield spreads throughout the agricultural area, trade will automatically stop because the agricultural land damaged and the food supply is not enough. In addition, if a war breaks out, food supply and stock will be difficult to get. Starvation will occur, and the most feared by Einstein in his prophecy is the use of nuclear weapons. The explosion of a nuclear bomb will destroy a large number of areas and can be a global disaster that has never happened in history. When a nuclear explosion occurs, it will send electromagnetic radiation waves that can kill the electricity system, even the electricity of the entire country. In addition, the nuclear war will cause tremendous human suffering. In addition to millions of deaths as a result of the explosion, many people will be affected by burns, radiation wounds, and diseases related to radiation exposure. The medical system and health will collapse, making rescue efforts and treatment difficult to do. What is more frightening than the nuclear war is the environmental impact that will occur in the long term. Atmosphere scientist Paul Crutzen wrote a short article in 1982. They explain that a nuclear war will produce a very large cloud of smoke because a nuclear bomb explosion will produce a radioactive cloud that will spread dangerous particles in the atmosphere. This will cause acid rain, global temperature drop, and radioactive pollution that pollutes the earth, water, and life resources. Automatically, the ecosystem will be damaged, many species of life will be threatened, and the radiation effects will affect the next generation. After the nuclear explosion, sometime after the thick rain will fall, it will be built on dense black oil pellets that can kill billions of people. This happened in Hiroshima, where the black rain fell 20 minutes after the bomb was dropped. The rain covered an area of 20 kilometers around the explosion point and radiated 100 times stronger radiation in the rain, enough to make a change in human blood. The terrible impact of radiation is still there today at the scene. Another thing that may happen is that there is a cloud of smoke as far as 15 kilometers above the surface of the Earth. This will move and be shifted by the wind so that it covers the entire planet, even blocking the sky. This impact will occur in the first years after the nuclear disaster was launched at each other. It is even said that humans will not see the bright sky in 30 years. Nuclear war will affect the temperature so that people find it difficult to produce food. This happens because the sun is blocked and the world temperature drops drastically. Humans will also live without hot seasons. Animals die of starvation and vegetables will wither and go extinct. Because in the first 5 years after the nuclear disaster, frost kills and disrupts the planting season. Next, there will be a calm time and the temperature will return to normal. But that only happened about 25 years later. The process carried out by the affected Earth's atmosphere will begin to tear ozone layers. Even a small nuclear war using 0.03% of the world's weapons can destroy 50% of the ozone layer. And the Earth will slowly be destroyed by UV sin. From all the terrible impacts of the nuclear war, of course Einstein is very correct in noting that the Third World War is a war that is very devastating for the continuity of the Earth and all of it. For that, it makes sense if Einstein notes the Third World War as a return for human civilization back to the Stone Age. And it could be a nuclear war, and the Third World War is a road to the apocalypse for humans.